Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is part of World Architecture 100 Live, a series that's online events held throughout today. I'm Chloe McCulloch, I'm the Editorial Director of Building Design, and this webinar is all about emerging trends in architecture. So it's actually global trends and prospects for 2022 and beyond. So over the next hour, we'll be listening to this amazing panel of guests that we've got from really big name architecture practices. And they'll be exploring these global design trends and issues affecting the way that we design buildings and communities throughout the world. So let me introduce who we've got here today. We've got Andrew Whalley from Grimshaw. We've got Jeremy Farrington from BDP. We've got Ian Apsley from Broadway Malyon, and Sophie Crocker from HKS. So welcome to you all. It's a real pleasure to have you on the panel today. And I'm really looking forward to your presentations. So before we get cracking, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping just so the audience knows what's coming up. And really what it is, each of our panelists will speak for roughly 10 minutes. And obviously they've all got their own specialist interests, areas that they want to pick up. But I think we can say that there will be some general themes coming through today. And probably that is best summarized by sort of talking around the rapid urbanization that we're seeing happening around the globe, the reimagining of our cities, the transport, health and social infrastructure that are needed, especially now in the wake of the pandemic. And obviously overarching all of that is the urgent need to design low carbon communities in the face of climate change. I know that there will be other themes that our panelists will pick up, but I think that just to give you a little bit of a flavour of what's to come. These are obviously enormous mega trends affecting all aspects of society, but today we'll be looking specifically through a sort of architectural lens. And just because it's really topical, I'm going to also ask, the presentations aren't about this, but given the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and given the fact that this is about global trends, I think a major geopolitical event that we seem to be going through at the moment is maybe something that we can touch upon at the end. But more important than that is that you, the audience, get to ask your questions. So please do post questions throughout the presentations. I will then pick up on those in the Q&A session at the end and put them to the panelists. So do post as any questions come up, post them, and we will get to them towards the end. And one question that always comes up is, can we get this webinar on demand? And you will be able to, not straight away, but within a couple of hours, the webinar will be available on demand. So if you've missed any of it, or you think colleagues might enjoy it and you want to share it, it will be there. So that's just a bit of a preamble to get us all into it. I think that's quite enough from me. So I'm going to hand over first to Jeremy. The rest of us, I think, are going to disappear, and it's over to Jeremy to present.
Thanks very much. I just do that. Okay, what can we all see?
That's looking great. I can see your screen. Thanks, Jeremy.
Very good. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and delighted to be joined this very interesting panel discussion today. I'm Jeremy Farrington. I'm the principal at BDP and head of our Singapore studio. The presentation that we've got today is, I suppose, from our perspective, we believe that there are a number of different trends and patterns emerging in the market. And whilst by no means a definitive list, we put forward 5 themes that we think are currently consistent around the world. Of course, to varying degrees, dependent on country and region to region. And I would suggest that the themes are not necessarily new, but we believe the focus that has been shone on them due to the pandemic in particular has perhaps increased the attention and response needed to address them. So the first theme is river waterfront regeneration, integrating resilient design and green infrastructure. Cities around the world, particularly urbanizing cities in emerging markets, are recognizing the benefits of a green approach to design and urban planning. And this, of course, is to help climate change issues, lower urban temperature, mitigate air pollution, etc., etc. But also lockdowns have, of course, brought into sharp focus the need for more accessible quality public green spaces. So what this means is that we're seeing a drive by both public and private sector funding into regeneration projects centered around river or waterfront renewal. And these projects are often underpinned by a combination of new civil infrastructure and green placemaking, but with the objective of unlocking the land value for future development. Of course, all at the same time as providing resilient design to address flooding and those climate change issues. So from China to South America, there are numerous places where cities still turn their backs to the river, and of course those settlements and temporary slums, etc., that normally live alongside them. But there is a step change happening, and it's being embraced, like I said, by both public and private sector. And we can see funding from central bank organisations like the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, JICA and others similar, all pushing investment into such projects. But equally on the private side, we've seen river regeneration projects such as this one on screen in Jakarta. That's been led by consortiums of civil engineering contractors, and these contractors seeking to potentially capitalise on potentially lucrative government contracts for flood prevention, water purification, etc., whilst reciprocally unlocking the adjacent riverside land value for further investment. And this is very much a recurring and growing theme. In Saigon, new road infrastructure funded in partnership by the city government and local investors are shifting the polluted and desperately busy roads, arteries, away from the river edge to provide improved public access, amenity and future development opportunities. And through our involvement just in the last few months, in fact, and by way of another example, is Patimban New City, and this is a port and logistics hub anchored by a green infrastructure approach. The intention here is to create new communities while responding to the very real need to address climate change and the effect on the coastline, whilst also expanding the desperately needed logistics infrastructure. And just in Indonesia alone, we know that there is a healthy pipeline of multiple projects moving forward that are infrastructure-led, waterfront urbanisation regen projects. And it's a pattern being repeated in many, many regions as we see it. But to shift scale and to go to the second theme we see as increasing in 2022 and moving forward is age-friendly living. And it's estimated that by 2050, there'll be more than 2 billion people aged over 60, and that's more than twice the number in 2000. And this, of course, is very much a global issue. But the challenges of addressing this vary around the world, dependent on culture and context and various other issues. But in the West, there are signs that there is potential for age-friendly living developments to help activate dormant or perhaps underutilized sites in high streets or towns, and possibly unlock difficult sites for development by encouraging more diversity and use in those town and city centres. But in other parts of the world, we know, notably Asia, of course, where the problem is perhaps more acute, there are different challenges to address. And multi-generational living is very much the cultural norm, as we know. But the supply of quality, integrated, age-friendly housing in urban centres is very, very limited. And we see a number of clients and government authorities at the moment trying to respond to this as we speak. And there is potentially a big opportunity for designers and consultants to formulate solutions that could be applied to a multitude of projects. Now, the third theme is perhaps one that doesn't come as a surprise, and it's about a reimagining of retail and the notion of a hyper-local community. Now, even before the pandemic, the way we shopped, spent our leisure time and worked was changing. And like it or not, the pandemic has, of course, accelerated this. And arguably, the retail landscape has undergone perhaps the most painful of transformations in the last couple of years. And we know that long-established brands, retailers, retail developers have shut their doors or contracted and are perhaps rethinking how they operate in response to the new normal. But the question of how retailers maintain a strong connection with and grow their customer base is still to be resolved. But one thing is for sure, they will still need a physical place to create connections and build those brand loyalties. So as a huge part of our town and city centres are historically given over to retail space, the opportunity to reimagine them is indeed challenging. And as a result, we're seeing many clients and developers around the world looking at their retail assets and asking the designers not just to renew and refresh, but to look at how spaces can be transformed into a mixture of retail-led meeting places or experiences that also include homes, workplace, and community function. And that leads sort of rather neatly into the fourth theme, which is of course related, and that of adaptive reuse. Now, over the last few years, there's been an increase in renovation projects, and that's a trend that's certainly expected to continue well beyond 2022. And the advantage of revitalising and refurbishing older buildings is, of course, obvious: cost and speed benefit in context of construction and planning, etc. And arguably a far more sustainable commodity in every sense. But COVID has, of course, changed the landscape of the way and the places that we work. So this has put further pressure onto how we adapt and future-proof buildings to give flexibility and create multi-purpose uses. But the hypothetical sort of story that you can see illustrated in this animation on screen is perhaps more based on a UK, European scale of project. But if we look more globally at places like China, for example, and other parts of Asia, where there's been a long attitude of demolish and build from new, there's increasingly a surge in larger and more ambitious repurposing projects. And these more city-scale adaptive reuse projects pose, we think, quite exciting design and technical opportunities for us as designers and architects. But the last theme to kind of mention, I suppose, is mission critical. And we see that expanding exponentially over the coming years ahead. And by mission critical, we don't just mean data centers. It can include logistics, production, sci-tech, and other similar functions. But it is very much predominantly led by data and digital hubs, of course. And stating the obvious, the exponential growth in data requirements through all aspects of life, particularly during the pandemic, continues to rise. And there is a huge demand for mission critical facilities around the world. Indeed, in Europe alone, there's projected $70 billion of investment in the next couple of years going into places like the UK, Netherlands, Ireland, Germany. But in all instances, the challenges there are how to design what are historically big box facilities that are energy thirsty, but potentially in innovative ways that can either sit in greenfield sites or in a more urban context. And it's very much a similar story in North America, where the challenges are being driven by the speed at which data center developers can actually bring their projects to market. And in Asia, unsurprisingly, the pattern continues, and the industry big hitters of Apple, Google, Microsoft, Huawei, etc., are all pushing expansion in China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, as well as the kind of more traditional data center hubs of places like here in Singapore, in fact. So that's a kind of whistle stop of the themes that we see moving forward over the coming year and coming years, I should say.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm just going to bring you back in quickly before we move on to the next panelist. But just on your point of obviously you've got those 5 themes there, but just going back to the first theme around river regeneration, because I know that you've written a piece that's on BD's website today around that. Obviously you've connected that very closely to climate change, but forgive the silly question in a way, but if you're talking around developing opportunities around rivers, and we're talking about water levels rising with climate change, how do you make sure that those communities are resilient?
And I think that is the fundamental question, and it has to be driven by the right infrastructure in the first instance. And certainly a lot of the projects that we're involved in are being led by government-funded projects that are looking exactly at that, putting in solutions that provide flood prevention, are kind of moving back the city edges, are looking at other mitigation measures, looking at water purification. So it's actually driven by an infrastructure funded strategy, and where we come in is how we can try and make that as a place and a destination that works successfully for the wider master plan, residential tenants, and the whole community that goes with it. So it has to be underpinned by the strong sort of civil engineering led strategy that deals with those issues.
Right, okay, well, I thought I'd just get the obvious question out there, but thank you very much. And I would encourage our audience, please post questions to Jeremy if you've got any questions around any of those 5 points. I thought that was a really interesting overview. Right, so we will move on to our next panelist. So that's Sophie Crocker from HKS. Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, Chloe. Let me know when you can see.
Oh, yes, we can see your slides coming up there, fine.
Thank you. All right, well, yes, I'm Sophie Crocker and I'm an architect and healthcare design researcher at HKS. And today I'm going to be sharing some thoughts on the opportunities and challenges in healthcare design for 2022. Over the last 2 years, we have had the unique experience. Sorry, let me just see. Is the slide moving? There we go. Okay, sorry. Over the last 2 years, we've had the unique experience of living through a global pandemic. We're not out of it yet, but we're settling into our lives with COVID. The pandemic has shown us the extent to which we are all connected and experience very similar problems and concerns. How the choice of one government or institution on the other side of the world can impact your life. Therefore, when I'm talking today, even if I'm sometimes using examples from the UK and the NHS, please do remember that all of these issues are global and not local, starting with the issues that are painfully exposed by the pandemic. Overcrowding. We have been aware of overcrowding in healthcare facilities for years. The flu season has stretched facilities winter after winter, but the pandemic pushed us to first put temporary facilities in conference centres, and then just this winter to put tents up in hospital car parks as backup. The NHS is at the start of the biggest hospital building programme in a generation, and we need to ensure that what we design and build now is ready to cope with the next surge event. HKS's Flex Hospital model interrogates how this can be done crucially whilst maintaining regular operations so that we don't sacrifice elective and non-emergent treatment for the surge needs, as we have seen waiting lists grow and grow over the last 2 years. We're actually currently working on applying these concepts to 2 facilities, one in the US and one in Southeast Asia. Staff shortages have also been highlighted. Before the pandemic, the World Health Organization predicted a global shortage of around 18 million health workers by 2030. Whilst the pandemic has brought record applications to vocations such as nursing, it has also driven many from the workforce. While low and middle income countries will be most severely affected, nowhere will go untouched. HKS's London Healthcare Advisory Team is looking at how to apply our Flex framework design thinking to resolve workforce issues through short, medium, and long-term approaches. Building design today can contribute to this by accommodating AI and robotics, which can support the scaling of the workforce without the need for more people. A paper laying this approach out in detail is in the works, so watch this space. Third, racial inequalities have been emphasised during the pandemic, as minority ethnic groups have died disproportionately from COVID, particularly in the first wave. The rapid evidence review released by the NHS Race and Health Observatory last week lambasted the NHS for extensive failings in its service of minority ethnic groups. Architecture cannot solve these failings alone, but we can work to ensure that the spaces we design truly serve and welcome all groups in society. This will involve ensuring that our profession is more representative of the communities we serve, as well as conducting intersectional healthcare design research, where we do not homogenise patient groups. These are 2 quite stark statistics that Black and minority ethnic people were 2 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than people of a white British background, and that Black women are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than white women. And these are statistics from the UK. Finally, there is the consistent presence of the climate emergency. We need to be designing to meet net zero targets and exceeding them. In response to the 2020 report, delivering a net zero national health service, HKS collaborated with Waits and Arup to form the Decarbonising Health Estates Partnership, a cross-sector interdisciplinary collaboration to advise NHS estates. Meanwhile, we have also been investigating how to upgrade the significant existing building stock in the NHS. Reusing buildings is a sustainable approach. We have all by now heard the adage, the most sustainable building is the one that isn't built. But in healthcare, reusing existing buildings has particular challenges. We have recently completed a 200-bed hospital in central London with the Cleveland Clinic, which converted an existing 1950s office building into a state-of-the-art facility. And we also completed last year an outpatient clinic for the same client in a 19th century commercial property. Issues regarding structural reinforcement, ventilation requirements, slab-to-slab heights are just a few of the challenges posed by these buildings. Within the NHS, the existing buildings were mostly built for healthcare purposes, but our needs and expectations have evolved. Single patient rooms are becoming the norm, technology is ever developing, and room sizes and needs have changed dramatically since the 60s and 70s, when a quarter of the NHS estates were built. And this is all before we consider energy performance. In conclusion, the healthcare sector is facing challenges that will not be fixed only by architecture, and certainly not in 2022, but we can contribute. We can address issues concerning bed provision in surge scenarios by designing for flexibility and scaling from within during emergencies. We can design spaces that make staff feel safe, appreciated, and give them room to rest, as well as designing departments that make staff members' lives easier and incorporating technologies that could augment the workforce. We can work to knowledgeably provide welcoming, familiar, and accessible spaces for all groups in society. And we can ensure that all of our design choices have their environmental impact at their heart and commit to initiating those conversations with our clients. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophie. I'm just going to bring you back quickly just before we move on to the next presentation. But I think it was really interesting to kind of have a deep dive into the healthcare sector, especially as, you know, when we were speaking at the beginning around the impact of the pandemic. I guess I've got a sort of two-part question for you, which is one, obviously there's, you know, a UK focused question, which is clearly the government is very keen to kind of get back to normal, and this week we're seeing, you know, the end of having to self-isolate, and everybody's really keen to get the economy going for understandable reasons. But the healthcare sector, you feel like well, this is a question really, but does it feel like the healthcare sector has really had to fundamentally rethink how it organizes wards so that you can have, you know, potentially deal with another pandemic, basically, in a much better way?
Yeah, I mean, the NHS did an astounding job of reacting and flexing to the needs of the last 2 years. However, it did have to do that generally by pausing elective surgeries, pausing some service provisions, and basically taking over additional space in the hospital for those critical care patients. And so what we hope can happen in the future is that they're able to do that, but without sacrificing some of those other spaces. And at the moment, that's not really possible in the buildings that we have, mostly, especially some of these older estates. So we're just keen to make sure that that is thought about and really worked into the proposals of the new round of hospitals. So I don't think in terms of operations, the NHS can manage these sorts of situations really incredibly well, but the buildings that they're operating within often are not really fit for purpose in those scenarios anymore. As I said, about a quarter of estates are sort of 50, 60 years old even, which when you think about how far medicine has advanced in that time, it kind of gives an idea of what we're up against. But yeah, I think it's about making sure that we can accommodate that in this new round of building.
And do you get the feeling from the client side that they are keen to work with, you know, briefs on that basis?
Flexibility is a big, it's a word that keeps coming up. And so one thing that we're trying to help clients with is defining that. So I think it was on the slide a little while ago, but we have 4 words within that vocabulary. So modifiability, versatility, convertibility, and scalability, which all can generally happen at different time frames. Perhaps you modify a room in the moment, you scale a building over a period of time. So it's just trying to have that conversation with clients with a lexicon that everyone is using. And so when you say you want it to be flexible, what do you actually mean? And what can we try and achieve with your budget? You know, do you want something to change over a long period of time or tomorrow? They require different inputs from design.
Okay, that's great. Look, I've got plenty more questions for you, but I think we'll go on to the next presentation and then hopefully scoop some more stuff at the end. So just a reminder to the audience, please post your questions for Sophie. If you've got anything specific on healthcare, that would be great, and we'll try to get to those. Right, thank you so much, Sophie. We're going to go on to Andrew Wally at Grimshaw now. Andrew, there, brilliant, wonderful. I'll stay with my mic on just so that we can check your presentation. It's coming up.
Is it on?
It looks like it's coming through. There's a white page showing at the moment. Is that the start of your presentation?
It's not got a green box around it like we normally get. Here we go. Should be showing, no?
Not yet. At the moment, it's just a white screen. Have you got two screens maybe? Is it showing on the other screen? Ah, here we go. Perfect. Over to you.
Now?
That's showing wonderfully. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Excellent. Well, thank you. So we've been working internationally, I think, for 30 years at least. But we made a kind of major decision about 20 years ago, just over, that the only way we could really work into different locations was to be based in that location, to be immersed in the city that we worked within. And so it led us to make a kind of quite critical decision to restructure the way we worked and to rather have a kind of London HQ with satellite studios, to have a kind of global network of studios all working together. So it's one partnership, one business, one company, but with the partners distributed sort of, you know, across the globe, from Los Angeles, New York, London, Paris, Dubai, and then Melbourne, Sydney, and Auckland. And that's proved to be very effective because it allows us to actually often split work across different studios. And as opportunities arrive, then we kind of build a small studio and support it from the larger studios, and then that kind of grows. And that's really been our structure. And it has all sorts of business complications to do with currencies and people and so on, which we can't go into today, but we've managed to make it work. So really, of the 40 years, I would say 30 has been international and 20 has been with this new structure, which has been the cornerstone of our growth, and has allowed us to bring in also a lot of international architects. So we have, I think, something like 50 different nationalities and 42 different languages across the studio, and I think that enriches us. But of course, the other issue is how do you hold on to your culture, which and your approach. But I think really for us, it's always been the kind of sustainability in architecture has always been a passion. 30 years ago, I worked with Nick Grimshaw on the pavilion for the World Expo in Seville, which is all about the environment, and it's really been something that we've kind of followed throughout. And just to put the big picture, I mean, why is this such an issue? Well, by the middle of the 21st century, so a generation or so away, we will double our cities. So all of the population growth will be in cities. So what that means is we'll be duplicating everything we have today will be duplicate. So whereas we can talk about adaptive reuse in the West and in legacy cities, many of the cities that we're going to have to create and form don't yet exist. None of the rail systems, none of the energy infrastructure systems, all of that has to be duplicated. So in 60 years, according to the United Nations latest statistics, we will be adding 230 billion square meters of buildings, which, to put it into perspective, because what's a billion? It's equivalent to constructing every building in Japan every year for the next 6 decades, or building Manhattan once a month. So that's the scale that we're adding to, and of course we heard all about COP26 and how we're trying to reduce our global greenhouse gases. And if you look at the last 10 years of growth in cities, you can see where the growth predominantly happening is to the east of the globe, if you like. It's the Middle East, India, China, Indonesia. And if you just look at the kind of underlying economic kind of prospects, if you like, there are wonderful statistical maps that were produced by the University of Sheffield, and they map all sorts of statistics. So you take the traditional Cartesian projection of our planet onto a flat surface, and if you reproject it in the form of GDP wealth, you can immediately see where the wealth is, which is of course America and Europe, but it's growing, of course, in the East. Contrast that against population, and you can see that the population and where the future growth is going to be as that population becomes more affluent is predominantly actually Africa, India, Indonesia, China. So thinking about all those future cities, I mean, the good thing is that 80% of our global GDP is generated in cities. So in other words, we have the wealth through that growth if we can spend it and invest it in the right way. However, currently 2/3 of the world's energy consumption is from our urban habitations, and 70% of the greenhouse gases. So if we're working currently to reduce and decarbonize our existing cities, and I think most people think it's highly unlikely, we're already well into 1.5 degrees above where we want to be, that it's against a background where we're going to double the current urban footprint, then we've got a major kind of problem to solve. So we need to increase productivity and efficiency. So we need really innovative thinking and ingenuity in the way we create our future cities and reframe our existing cities. So the United Nations has categorically stated that only option is to mitigate catastrophic climate change is, of course, as we all know, through highly efficient low carbon design. And carbon neutral buildings must become absolutely the standard globally within this decade. So we're already 2 years into that decade. So we signed the World Green Building Council Net Zero commitment in 2019. And really, from our perspective, I think, is how do we get that equilibrium? So, I mean, this is, if you like, a kind of faux equation to try and stress the challenge. So if our human impact on the environment is the product of population growth multiplied by affluence, then the only balancing factor to that is to rethink technology or design ingenuity. And so we've committed for our own business to be carbon neutral, which we achieved in 2020. It was actually, we were given, of course, a jump start because one of our major carbon footprints is through aviation, which of course came to a rapid halt. But we're also aiming to have almost all of our design work to be carbon net zero by 2025, and we're well on the path for that now. And actually engaging, I think, with like-minded clients that share that vision. And really working towards actually a social, environmental, regenerative designs by 2030. So I'm just going to finish off by going through just some examples from different parts of the world that we've actually kind of completed or completing. So starting off with Eastern Europe, our first project there was actually in St. Petersburg in Russia, and it was extremely difficult with visas and getting money out and so on. And I think the other panelists will talk to that. This is Tirana, the last communist state of capital city of Albania. And for about 10 years now, we've been working on a master plan with changing political mayors coming and going, presidents coming and going. So it's been quite a challenge. But it's been a very rewarding process, and it's something that we're engaged with our cities group in looking at cities and how you can reconfigure existing cities as well as plan for future ones. So, it used its central river more or less as a sewer, and it was basically rubbish and complete disaster. And so what we wanted to do was to turn it into the major asset of the city, turn it into this sort of green vein and lung running through the city, and use that as a means of reorganizing the city with a whole series of different events along that river, from outside Lidos to different public piazzas and so on. And this is it fairly recently. So, what you don't see is there's a whole lot of infrastructure built for future rail and tram systems. but it's completely, changed the city. So that is now what was that polluted city now come to life as a major asset. So I think as architects, we can really bring a lot of creative thinking that can actually transform spaces, but also think about the ecology and environment of those spaces. And if you want to see growth, I mean, a lot of our work currently in the Middle East is to do with master planning, large-scale city developments, and so on. And it's probably one of the most forward-looking regions as far as sustainability goes, which for those who don't work there, I think they're quite surprised. So here's Dubai 30 years ago. So, I mean, if you want to see growth, this is the Sheikh Zayed highway down there, and this is it today. So, a city has grown, it has the world's tallest building, etc. So that whole city's grown in a generation. And I think what's happening now, though, is that the whole region has woken up to the importance of sustainability in quite an interesting way. And so they're now overlaying a whole set of sustainable criteria, public realm criteria. They've adopted the UN Sustainability Development Goals as part of a framework for future development and laid out their own very sustainable vision, the 2040 Dubai vision. And we just completed the Sustainability Pavilion Terra, which is part of the World Expo there. And if you've got still a month to go, so if you can go, I would recommend going because there's 190 countries. So there's an awful lot to see. But we did a completely net zero building. It generates all of its own water, its power, deals with all of its own waste to demonstrate in the world's harshest environment, you can do net zero. And it's a permanent build, that they designed as a permanent extension to Dubai, so it will be an innovative city. And then India, we've just finished a highly sustainable and green new airport outside Delhi. China, again, is a very interesting region. Our first build project there was actually for Disney for Tomorrowland. And the speed of construction is breathtaking. You can create, they created all of that in 3 years. And we're now just embarking on Shenzhen East interchange system. And I think we saw a project earlier on for a data center in Shenzhen. It's a massive growing area with an enormous amount of potential. So that gives you a kind of quick overview of, I think, what are the key issues in my mind that we've all got to address, thinking about this massive growth, but also the incredible opportunity and I think the creative thinking that we can bring.
Thanks so much, Andrew. That's really interesting and great to see your pictures of completed projects there at the end, just to give us a flavour around the world where you've been active and obviously very successful. I'm just going to pick up on one small phrase that you said, which is that we try to work with like-minded clients. Easier said than done, isn't it, for architects? And how do you find that?
Yeah, no, so I think it's a very good, because my fellow partners brought it up. I mean, when we set these goals of trying to, all of our work being net zero, well, what happens if we have a client coming along with a very interesting project, but they don't have any interest in sustainability? But I think what we've found is if you talk to any client that has, goals and ambitions and sort of, that as soon as you talk about the opportunity for sustainability and designing net zero, they're extremely interested and want to engage. And I think also because we've set these ambitions, I guess it's also bringing to us clients with similar ambitions. We do a lot of work, for instance, in the US with Google, who have exactly the same kind of vision. Likewise, we're working on a couple of major science and technology projects in the Middle East, and they're both totally regenerative in design ambition. Dealing with power, wastewater, etc. So I think the whole the opportunity is growing, and in a way, I think if you don't share that vision, you're rapidly becoming a dinosaur as a business, because your shareholders will be demanding it as well.
Okay, well that's a really positive point to make, I think, there, and possibly one that we can pick up towards the end. So I think that loads more questions that that's thrown up, but thank you so much, Andrew. We're going to bring in Ian Apsley from Broadway Malyon now. Ian, are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ah, lovely. Yeah, that's showing. That's great.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So I'm just going to talk a little bit at the start about some of the issues and challenges that we think are facing the profession, and by virtue of that, really, our practice as a WA 100 practice, we're, again, with our peers here today, regarded as some of the larger architectural practices. What does it mean to be a larger architectural practice right now? Well, I think we're seeing a shifting emphasis. We're seeing a more confusion, I think, between certain professional disciplines and others, and that's happening in accountancy, in law, in the architectural profession as well. We're seeing more competition. 20 years ago, architecture practices would usually just compete against other architects. These days we find we are competing against engineers, against product designers, and even real estate agents, actually. So it's a very interesting time. Those times have been, I think some of the challenges we face have been more accelerated by the pandemic. And that's caused us, I think, to take a look at our practice in a different way. Where are we going to see the big shift coming forward? And we've become fascinated by, I think, a couple of ideas within the architectural profession itself, which is, the idea of a small practice within a big practice. Traditionally, small practice architectural firms tended to be generalists. You had to be a generalist. You had to do everything. Whereas in a startup business, you tend to be quite niche. So how can we actually inject some of the kind of energy from startup businesses into a larger architectural practice? And that's caused us to think about actually how we introduce businesses within businesses, things like planning consultancy, which we did a number of years ago, but we built a business model that we're now looking at, urban analytics, even a service to actually help clients find development land. And that's taking us outside the kind of, if you like, the professional boundaries of the architectural profession. But I think it's enabling us actually to focus on some of the bigger issues that we've heard everyone talk about today, in terms of how you provide infrastructure, how we deal with rapid urbanization, how we deal with low carbon, how we deal with it in a more kind of holistic way that maybe inside the box of a traditional architectural practice you don't have all of the skill sets to do. And I think the biggest trend in our profession over the next few years will be around automation and standardization. And therefore, what's really interesting us at the moment is how we create that blend and that balance between the digital tools, human-centric design, and where that takes architects and the architectural process, and ultimately its product. We've all probably heard a lot about parodies made between the the construction industry and the car industry, with predictions that the construction industry will become a lot more like the car industry in the future. But to give you some stats, at the moment there's something like 2,500 car designers working in the world, and there are 1.7 million architects. So it's not something that I see coming anytime soon, but the reality is I think we need to learn from where standardization and automation can help us, and that's definitely in areas like construction quality, it's definitely in building and environmental performance, and it's definitely in safety. But the key thing I believe to focus on is how we actually blend digital tools and automated practices with that kind of human-centric process. And to give you some ideas of projects that we're working on at the moment where we're looking to do this, we're working on we've just completed a large master plan for the World Bank in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, which is predominantly a transport-oriented project. This is looking at a new rapid transit system, which is because of the economic and infrastructural constraints in Tanzania will be a BRT, it will be a bus, predominantly a bus-driven system. And that's looking at reducing commuting times into the center of the city, a typical commute down from 3 hours to 45 minutes over the next 10 years, along a 137-kilometer network. And again, our process here was very much to start with a traditional consultation, stakeholder consultation, community consultation in groups, but indeed overlaying with that new methods of doing that, social media, data capture, etc. And then actually working out how we can make places that the community want, that actually provide the necessary infrastructure needs within an incredibly tight series of funding constraints and budget over the next 10 years. We're part of the Future Cities, the Global Future Cities Programme, which is a UK government-led initiative, and we're working on 4 rapidly developing cities in Asia. One of those is Bangkok, where again we're looking at transport system connectivity, the BTS system there, and how that might integrate in future to create, at the moment, what is quite a disparate transport system of bus, rail, river and canal networks, how that can be joined up. But again, we've done that very much through data capture, GIS, etc., which is helping to identify sites for economic development to support jobs in local communities. That is the main driver behind identifying the development sites here, but also done in such a way that we can actually create a highly connected and highly innovative transport infrastructure for the government, for the local government to actually take over and run. And then actually taking the methodology, we developed a toolkit, we developed a transport-oriented development toolkit, which starts to fuse these things together, consultation elements and elements of data capture and GIS, and build a matrix. And our most recent example is actually in the UK, where we've been working with Rochdale Council in Greater Manchester, again with a slightly different brief here. And the brief here is actually to look at existing connectivity to see how it can be improved, and from there to identify sites for development, sites for commercial development, to release cash and unlock value, which can then be from the public sector purse, which can then be actually used to regenerate and recycle into the economy, delivering genuine regenerative benefits in a kind of self-funding and economically sustainable way. So I think summarising our belief in the fears that I think a lot of the profession is facing at the moment about, what does digitisation and AI and so forth bring forward. I think it brings all the opportunities of taking out, maybe some of the more kind of manual tasks out of what we do. But it certainly, I think, leaves architects with, if anything, our ability as problem solvers and lateral thinkers and loose thinkers is going to become even more important. But I think a key shift will be actually moving us from a kind of a reacting to client briefs, hopefully into becoming more of kind of proactive service, where we can stay with clients for longer periods of time. We can help them monitor buildings. We can give them a kind of a problem avoidance service rather than always a problem solving service. And that comes back to one of the points made earlier today about the solution isn't always building. In a net zero world, we need to be thinking much more carefully about how we create long-term, sustainable, reusable buildings. And apologies, I think I cut out there. Create long-term, economically sustainable buildings that are right for the planet.
Thank you so much, Ian. Yes, you cut out just for a few seconds, but I think we caught everything. If that's the end of your presentation, Ian, I'll bring everyone back together. If we can all turn on our webcams. Lovely, thank you. Oh, have we got everybody? We're popping up gradually. There we go. Right, we've just got 10 minutes left, but I think the timing's worked out really well. And thank you so much for your presentations. I think we've covered so much there. I might actually just on the back of what Ian was saying, just open this question up to all of you around, I think what Ian was really touching on was that the future of the profession, actually. Going beyond just the projects to thinking about the roles. And I thought it was really interesting saying that architects are increasingly competing with non-architects. does that actually mean that and I don't know, in your different practices, are you recruiting non-architects to get those skills in-house so that you can supply those wider services to clients globally? And are the global demands of clients perhaps slightly different than what we might expect in the UK? Andrew, you're nodding, so I might just go straight back to you on that.
No, not to do that. Yeah, I mean, well, certainly from our perspective, I mean, I think as Ian pointed out, there are, you know, other kind of major kind of businesses moving into the area of decarbonisation and sustainable design because they see the opportunities, you know, citywide. So to answer your question, yes, you know, we have for a long time industrial designers and do a lot of product design, industrial design. But now on the kind of macro scale, urban designers and you know, our head of sustainability, Dr. Paul Toyne, his PhD is from Imperial on the kind of science of sustainability. He's not an architect. So I think, you know, to deal with the kind of breadth that we're facing, we need to. And the other two areas, I think, is design technology. So a lot of computational designers that are programmers that are writing, you know, we do software development, for instance, and that's part of our decarbonisation strategy, which we'll be launching shortly. So you need a much broader range of skills and technical skills, and particularly the other area I think which is really emerging is DFMA, as it's called in the UK. It has a different name in every region, so you can't talk about DFMA in America, no one knows what you're talking about, but if you say modular prefabrication, they do. So, and we've done a lot of research work paid for by the UK government with Buro Happold in that area. Because, you know, the government has made a commitment that all of their public procurement will be through DFMA. And it's not just about the actual design of the product, it's actually about the systemization of the process and the introduction of artificial intelligence in the design process.
Okay, thanks Andrew for your thoughts on that. Ian, I don't know if you wanted to add to anything. Obviously that was your point that you were making, but I thought it was a really interesting one.
I mean, very similar to Andrew. I mean, I think now that I haven't got the latest stats, but I think, you know, if you look at our business 20 years ago, something like 85% of the people we employed were registered and qualified architects. I think these days it's down nearer 55, and that's because, you know, as Andrew says, lots of different professions really that come into play, which include designers, technology specialists, social media specialists, all sorts of different professions that work together.
Yeah, Jeremy, you're nodding there.
Yeah, I mean, I very much concur with Ian and Andrew, and I think, you know, BDP, as the first slide of my presentation said, has been around for 60 years, and I think 59 of those years we've been in interdisciplinary practice. But I think even BDP as a multidisciplinary recognises the gaps in our armour, and it's partly why we joined with the Nippon Koi Group 6 years ago, who are, you know, Japan's biggest civil engineers, because that is where the world is headed, and I think you need that armoury to really face the problems that we see day to day around the world.
Absolutely, and Sophie, from a sort of healthcare perspective, do you see lots of other disciplines coming in and adding their two pennyworth to healthcare design?
Yeah, I mean, in-house, we've developed our own software to be able to analyze lines of sight in plans, as well as walking distances and things that we can analyze and generate plans far more rapidly than one even very experienced planner would be able to do. It's often not about producing something that's radically different to what a human could do, but it's doing it perhaps faster. Perhaps there is an option or two that you wouldn't have been able to think of or get to. And then when you're talking to a client, you know, you can explain those differences and justify perhaps a more radically different approach sometimes with that backup of that data. In addition, we've got people from who've come to us from Big Four consultancies, as well as NHS estates teams, to help us look at how NHS estates are reconfiguring their master plan on a much bigger scale. So urban designers and landscape architects all feeding into that as well. So it's definitely becoming a big beast, I guess. It's not just one building here and there, it's much more grand scale master planning, and then all the way down into the scale of one ward or one bedroom as well. So all of the disciplines are required for all of that, but it's exciting.
Yeah, very, very much so. Well, look, I'm gonna whisk us on to sort of broader geopolitical events that are happening at the moment. Now, in our sort of pre-chats, I think everybody said they don't actually have colleagues based in Ukraine, but I think you've all got experience of projects in Eastern Europe, if not Russia. So I just thought I'd just open up the debate to, you know, what goes through a sort of architecture business's mind when you are considering risks as well as opportunities. We've basically focused mostly on the opportunities in this webinar, but here we are presented with a big risk. Even if we're not talking specifically about this risk, how do you manage big risks like that, and what are the sorts of factors that you have to consider? Jeremy, shall I start with you? You're nodding. Oh, sorry, you're muted there.
Schoolboy error. You thought after 2 years we'll get this cracked. BDP's worked in Russia on a number of occasions over the last 10 years, and I think Russia is a very exciting, vibrant place to work, and there's some fantastic projects being delivered by many international consultants and also domestic consultants. But of course, the writing has always been on the wall about the potential risks that could come, and we've seen it today in terms of Boris putting controls in terms of movement of money, and that was always the issue that we were most concerned about. So, and I'm sure we're not alone in our approach to this. When we entered into contracts with some of our Russian clients, we negotiated very specific sort of clauses that dealt with that issue in terms of if there were sanctions put in place between countries at sort of geopolitical level, there were mechanisms in place for us to receive our funds, frankly speaking. And I think that's about all you can really do, actually, in these kind of situations. The other way, of course, is working very closely with local partners in Russia and local consultants, and that's really important in terms of kind of mitigating risk, is understanding if you haven't got your own footprint locally, it's having those partners who do, so you can deal with those kind of issues. But I think, as I say, I mean, it's always been there, this risk, and I think I'm sure we're not alone in terms of how we've dealt with that.
Yeah, and Andrew, I know in your map where you'd shown where you're active and you've got your different studios, but you'd also pinpointed some projects, and I thought I saw one that was Moscow. I'm not sure, but is that an active project?
Probably St. Petersburg, yeah. Oh. So we did the airport, Pulkovo Airport there a few years ago. And we've actually just been working on the second phase of it, but I should imagine that'll be coming to a rapid stop. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly as Jeremy said. It's being paid, and even access. I mean, during Pulkovo, you know, there was a fallout between the US, UK, and Russia, and they came down and stopped, you know, cancelled our visas and limited our visits to no more than, you know, twice a year, I think it was. So it's very difficult to work on a project, you know, that remotely, and our you know, fortunately, we were really focused on the design side, not the delivery of the construction, or it would have been impossible. So I think that's always the issue, and it's the issue in many parts of the world is the sort of financial risk. And I can think of a few companies, I won't mention them, who have either gone bust or got very nearly to going bust because they got in so deep, and you get deeper and deeper, and you feel the only way you're going to get out is to go even deeper. And so it's a real issue. But the UK DTI does do a kind of system that helps, which we work with. It helps, if you like, give you a level of security on. They do a kind of financial support system that allows architects to work into areas they may not be confident working into, and have some surety of being paid. Because ultimately, you know, we're fragile businesses that work on very thin margins. And we have a kind of duty to our staff, really, to be, you know, responsible that way.
I mean, with that in mind, do you think people will be considering work in that region going forward? Do you think that?
I think so. Currently, I think it would be rather foolish to do anything there at the moment. I mean, you know, it's just the risk is too high, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's certainly quite a week to be having an event about global trends with that in mind. And actually, we probably could have done a whole webinar just on that. But unfortunately, our time here has come to an end. But it was really great to focus on the opportunities that you've all found in various parts of the world and in various sectors. And it seems like there's some fantastic projects going on and very sustainable projects in parts of the world that you wouldn't necessarily think were leading the way. So that's very encouraging to hear about. So I'll just wrap up by saying thank you to Andrew, Jeremy, Sophie and Ian. That's it today for our World Architecture Live, but it was a real pleasure having you all here, and thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.